Chapter 1, Celestial Mechanics. Einstein, when discussing an experimental test of his general theory of relativity, was once asked what he would do if the experiment didn't agree with the theory. He was unperturbed at the prospect. So much the worse for experiments. The theory is right. P.C. Davies, The Mind of God, 1992. This statement by Einstein, in a sense, explains the dilemma Velikovsky and his proponents have faced from the beginning. The physicists, astronomers, and mathematicians have argued that there is no evidence to bring Newtonian, Einsteinian celestial mechanics into question. How can Velikovsky be right when the most perfect of sciences, celestial mechanics, completely corroborated, correlated, and congruent with the motions of celestial bodies and with most perfect of sciences, mathematics, that absolutely proves him in error? The reason I maintain that Velikovsky can be and is correct is that celestial mechanics is not corroborated, correlated, and congruent with motions of celestial bodies. In fact, application of the most perfect of sciences, mathematics, shows that the laws of physics presented by Newton and Einstein fail to prove or explain these motions. To the contrary, the application of Newton's laws and Einstein's curved space to mathematically prove what they claim to prove does no such thing. Let me begin. 1. Bernard Cohen has written, Immanuel Velikovsky attempted to revolutionize physical science with a radical set of ideas concerning the way the solar system came into its present state. Needless to say, Velikovsky's ideas contradict basic laws of dynamics and gravity. Velikovsky proposed that electrical and magnetic forces overwhelmed the action of gravity on the close encounter of planets. Though widely disseminated in the public press, Velikovsky's ideas were not accepted by the scientific community. Robert Jastrow. Nothing could be more exciting than to witness a revolution of scientific thought in our own lifetime. Unfortunately, he concluded, the evidence does not support this possibility. Therefore, let us examine these laws that Cohen claimed refuted Velikovsky's hypothesis to see if they truly are all that is claimed for them. Tidal theory, gravity, and mathematics. We have explained the phenomena of the heavens and our sea by the power of gravity. It is enough that gravity does really exist and act according to the laws we have explained, and abundantly serves to account for the motions of the celestial bodies and of our sea tides. Isaac Newton, Principia, Book 3. The understanding of the tides has been a problem for science from the very early times, as described by Dominic Reeve, Andrew John Chadwick, and Christopher A. Fleming. Tides have been studied from the earliest times. Indeed, it is documented that Aristotle spent the final part of his life on the island of Euboea, where he studied the tidal flows. It has been suggested that his failure to explain tidal variations drove him to hurl himself into the ocean, where he drowned. Galileo also had a theory of tides to prove that the earth rotated, and the tides were a clear indication of this motion. J. Glenn Ford maintains that Galileo's tidal theory, as an empirical attempt to explain the facts, worked much better than Newton's wholly theoretical treatment of the problem. He goes on to suggest Galileo's tidal history has normally been treated by historians of science as nothing more than a hasty attempt to supply an answer to one of the demands of the anti-Copernicans, who wished for proof of the Earth's motion. However, when looked at from the point of an empirical oceanographer, it turns out to be a sophisticated theory which explains to a high degree of accuracy the complex tidal movements of the Adriatic Sea. From where it is known Galileo obtained his data. His theory of the Adriatic tides was, in this respect, of far greater explanatory value than the later Newtonian theory, although less theoretically satisfying. What the bleep does theoretically satisfying mean? Well, we don't care about the truth, it just sounds pretty, so let's keep it. Hence, this theory was an attempt by a scientist in a true Baconian spirit to make the theory fit the facts. Set in the scientific context of the time, it was a credible attempt to solve a problem which is still causing difficulties today. Nevertheless, Newton's analytical description of the tide has been accepted as correct by most modern scientists, as it is presented in textbooks and books of astronomy and gravity. Ford, above, just told that the problem of applying gravitational theory to explain tides is still causing difficulties today. Harlow Shapley was unaware that these difficulties were actually contradictions to Newtonian tidal theory. In a letter to Horace Callan, Dean of the Graduate Facility of the New School for Social Research, May 27, 1950, chided Velikovsky for not understanding these long-established laws of gravity that explain the tides. Writes, Dr. Velikovsky's claim that there have been changes in the structure of the solar system during historical times has implications which apparently he has not thought through. Perhaps he was unable to convey to me in our brief conversation, if in historical times there have been these changes in the structure of the solar system, in spite of the fact that our celestial mechanics has been for scores of years able to specify without question the positions and motions of the planetary system for many millennia fore and aft, then the laws of Newton are false. The laws of mechanics which worked to operate the tides are fallacious, but they have been tested completely and thoroughly. In other words, if Velikovsky is right, the rest of us are crazy. And seriously, that may be the case. It is, however, improbable. The point regarding tides as proposed and explained by Newton and all who attempted to make gravitational theory correlate with tidal motions has failed. But Shapley, and nearly all those who repeat Shapley's claim, are simply not mindful of that basic fact. Newton himself was unable to make his theory congruent with the actual behavior of tides, and was forced to repeatedly cull the data to force it to appear to fit gravitational theory. In this respect, Hans C. Ohanian explains, careful examination of Newton's writings have revealed that some of the errors in the Principia were a deliberate and dishonest attempt to mislead. It's another case of a guy playing smart. In the Principia, Newton proposed that the exact quantitative agreement between theory and observation was the ultimate criterion of scientific truth. As he said in the preface, he that works with less accuracy is an imperfect mechanic, and if any could work with perfect accuracy, he would be the most perfect machine of all. And to convince his audience he would be the most perfect machine, he proceeded to fabricate the required agreement between the theory and observation, by fair means or foul. Newton faked some theoretical calculations, and he engaged in flagrant cherry-picking of observational data. There it is. Discarding those data that did not quite fit his calculations. Richard Westphal, one of Newton's most incisive biographers, called this nothing short of deliberate fraud, and he labeled Newton a master of the fudge factor. Examples of fakery are found in Newton's theoretical calculations of the precession of the equinox, the magnitude of the force of gravity acting on the moon, the heights of the tides. In all of these cases, he has a good qualitative understanding of the underlying physics, but inadequate mathematical tools and or inadequate observational data for an adequate quantitative analysis. Velikovsky, Stargazers and Grave Diggers. These instances of fraud by Newton are somewhat reminiscent of that Galileo perpetrated with his theory of tides. But whereas we might give Galileo the benefit of the doubt and charity regarding his mistaken theory of tides as an isolated case of self-delusion, no such excuse will serve for Newton. His acts of fraud occurred repeatedly, much too often to admit of self-delusion as a plausible explanation. In the perpetration of fraud, Newton was a recidivist, deserving of no charity. Besides, we have documentary evidence from letters between Newton and Roger Coates, the editor of the second edition of the Principia, that they engaged in collusion to mend the numbers. Coates would propose some fraudulent adjustment of observational data to make that Scholium appear
I'm still messed up.
Scholium appear to best advantage as to the numbers, and Newton would do Coates one better by contriving some fudge factor that suited the occasion. As will be shown, Newton's laws do not now, nor ever could, mathematically explain ocean tides. It is only by assuming that a Newtonian explanation works that Shapley's arguments for tides has been presented by many of Velikovsky's critics. The fact of the matter is that Velikovsky did answer Shapley directly on this point. Oceanic tides, according to Shapley, follow precisely Newton's formula, was proof that Velikovsky could not be right. How precisely do they follow the formula? In James Gillily, Aaron Waters, and A.O. Woodford's Principles of Geology, 1951. The year after Shapley used tidal theory to discredit Velikovsky, pages 396 and 398, we read, "The ancients knew that the ebb and flow of the tides varied from phases of the moon. So complex is the real earth as compared with the idealized earth assumed by astronomers and physicists that we have as yet no general gravitational theory that permits tidal forecasts for any point on an ocean. Tides are, of course, predicted with great accuracy for all principal ports. These are not computed from general Newtonian theory, however, but from analysis of tidal records over a long period of years in the particular port concerned, and the Newton scheme fails to explain fully the vagaries of the local tides. For example, many ports have but one tide in a lunar day, instead of two which Newton theory requires. In others, the lag is as many hours from the time the moon is at zenith. And still others, the two daily tides are of great different height. They also vary with the seasons, which does not affect the distance between the earth and the moon, as gravity is only affected by mass and distance squared. These and many other facts make it clear that the tides are not a simple direct response to the vertical component of the moon's gravitational pull, which is recently far too small for effective lifting of water masses anyway. Velikovsky and many of his supporters have failed to dig deeper into this problem, and his critics have failed to gather the full significance of just how important this failure of gravitational theory is. In this respect, Velikovsky wrote, "The authors of the textbook in geology did not express any doubt concerning the Newtonian theory of tides. They showed only that there exist many irregularities that require explanation, that the force of the moon's gravitational pull is insufficient to raise the size of the tides observed, and that no theoretical prediction of tides is possible. Therefore, to refer to the tides as providing support for the Newtonian theory is once more a statement in contradiction with the known facts." Many critics will respond saying that these are complications caused by the shape of the continents, bays, depths of water, etc., that can account for these discrepancies between theory and observation. That is simply not true of the overall problem with tidal theory, and is simply a way to avoid facing the fundamental fact that the tidal theory has always failed, as will be shown below. The problems with this theory have long been debated. For example, a popular weekly magazine, Our Home Journal for September 2nd, 1871, page 151, contains a response to a writer who maintained that the moon produces these tides. GWP writes his views on this problem. Your correspondent, WRE, has presented no new arguments in favor of lunar theory of the tides, except those founded upon a mistaken view of facts, and lunar theory of the tides except those founded upon a mistaken view of facts, and the inseparable objection to such a theory we may very well admit, as he says, that the difficulties connected with lunar theory presented by GWP may not be explained satisfactorily in harmony with the moon theory. That is really giving up the whole matter in controversy. If there are facts against the theory that cannot be made to harmonize with it, then the harmony is false. When the tides keep time with the revolutions of the moon is by no means in accordance with the facts. The tides gradually and regularly rise or flow about 6 hours, remaining stationary about 6 hours, to flow again after another brief response. The attraction of gravitation confines the moon to its orbit. The moon's attraction of the earth is so small as to be imperceptible. If the moon's attraction is so powerful as to lift the waters of the ocean from 40 to 70 feet above their natural level, it would surely raise a feather from the ground, and WJB would be enabled to demonstrate his theory by his own weight when standing on a scale, which would, when she is overhead, exerting her vast power of attraction in raising him up. But the fact that he really weighs the same in any possible position of the moon is fatal to his theory. The lunar theory involves the following absurdities. The moon has not the slightest power to attract solid bodies on the Earth's surface, not even lifting the down of a thistle from the ground, while her attraction of water is so powerful as to lift up to a height of 60 to 70 feet thousands of square miles of the waters of the ocean. But while she attracts water with so vast a power, she exercises no perceptible influences over another fluid, the air, which surrounds the earth to a closer, greater depth, and from its nature and position to the moon should be more susceptible to the moon's attraction than are the waters of the ocean. The problem of tides has baffled the greatest minds of science for centuries, and is still inexplicable in terms of gravitational law, although it should not be inexplicable. Gravity was solely responsible for lifting masses, then the atmospheric tides should coincide with all oceanic ones, not that they should be of the same height. The atmosphere, being easier to lift than water, should be raised to a greater height than the ocean, but in reality it falls far short of the ocean tidal heights, and it does not exhibit the same periodicities as the ocean is clear proof that gravity is not the sole force operating. There must be some other force creating these dichotomies between oceanic and atmospheric tides. Richard Lindzen has argued that heating and cooling of ozone in the upper atmosphere by the sun causes that part of the atmosphere to expand or contract, thus allowing atmospheric tides to be fully explained. As the atmosphere heats up during the day, it expands, and at night, when it cools, it contracts, each phase occurring every 12 hours. Nevertheless, in a 1980 paper, he admits to a contradiction that exists with his theory, namely, that the expansion and contraction are not connected with the surface air pressure. None of the above expansions and contractions resulted in any improvement in the phase discrepancy of the solar semi-durational 12-hour surface pressure oscillation. If Lindzen's theory was correct, then the daily heating of the upper atmosphere should cause the surface pressure to fall, while contradictions should act to raise the surface pressure. But these day-night oscillations do not correlate with surface atmospheric pressures, as Lindzen admits, they exhibit a phase of discrepancy. Again, as with ocean tides, neither gravity nor solar heating explains the atmospheric tides. What then is the possible solution? Again, electromagnetism has been left out of these matters. Since the discovery in 1752 by Benjamin Franklin's kite experiment, it has been demonstrated repeatedly that the atmosphere is electrically charged and that the electricity can be drawn down from the clouds. Other later experiments that were carried out show not only that the atmosphere is charged, but that its charge varies over a 12-hour period from the day side to that of the night side, according to D.R. McGorman and W.D. Rust. Also in 1752, French scientist Émile Laminaire detected weak electrification in the atmosphere when there were no clouds and determined that the intensity of fair weather electricity varied from night to day. This was confirmed in 1775 by the more sensitive experiments of the Italian scientist Cesare Bessaria. What we have here, instead of a thermal forcing oscillation of the atmosphere, as Lindzen suggested, is an electrical oscillation operating every 12 hours in phase with the day and night atmospheric tides. This is not connected to the solar day to night heating variation, nor to the sun's gravitational pull. In essence, what we actually have is an oscillating, electrified atmosphere in phase with the sun, and the atmospheric tides rising and falling with it. This is never taken into scientific consideration because of the shackles that Newtonian theory has put on the thinking of atmospheric scientists. Electromagnetic effects have no place in their tidal theories. As we can see, electromagnetism apparently correlates with ocean tides in tandem with lunar gravitation. It also correlates with atmospheric tides and solar electromagnetic effects on the Earth. Having omitted electromagnetic evidence from their considerations, scientists are left with many contradictions associated with ocean and atmospheric tides, and actually have no theory at all. Now, it's a 24-page chapter, and it goes on to say many things. I'll just highlight a couple. How can Newtonian theory be correct when it can predict both a high tide and a low tide at one place on the Earth at the same time? The entire ensemble of astronomical phenomena related to tidal theory is not, nor ever has been, explained by gravitational theory. For example, Michelson pointed out that the deceleration of the Earth's rate of rotation, especially related to tides caused by the moon, is a failure. Nonetheless, Carl Sagan also erroneously argued that tidal theory and the conservation of energy and angular momentum with the Earth-Moon system show that Velikovsky is wrong, without appeal to commentary or other exogenous intervention. But tidal theory does not explain the slowing of the Earth's rotation. There, too, it has failed. But Sagan was also ignorant of this. This author must admit that I, too, had accepted tidal theory as a valid aspect of Newtonian Einsteinian theory until I uncovered this research. I retract this acceptance based on all this research above. Would that Velikovsky's critics have the decency to do the same? They simply can't, because to admit this is to also admit that Newtonian Einsteinian theory breaks down when it comes to tides. That means that some other force than gravity is operating in space, and that would imply Velikovsky could be right about what that force is, that they will not and cannot ever admit for very understandable reasons. Not only must they admit that the theory of gravity is not universal, but that it clearly implies Velikovsky may very well be right. More on this will be presented. Nevertheless, critics will surely argue that because Newton's laws do not account for lunar tides and numerous other phenomena, has nothing to do with the criticism of Velikovsky's instability thesis. They will argue that, as a matter of fact, planetary motions are in full accord with Newtonian celestial mechanics, and nothing can explain this away. The problem is that since no one has reevaluated Newtonian theory vis-a-vis planetary motion, this argument can and will be shown below to be false. Stability, instability, the Earth-Moon system. So I think if you want to check this out, it's EmmanuelVelikovsky.com. Newton, you can just go and Google Newton, Einstein, and Velikovsky. It's free in PDF. I'm reading it now. It's very good read. And it goes on. He just gives example after example of mainstream science misguided notions. So I leave the link below for you, and I will be reading from it on other occasions about other things. I just came across this PDF book, and it just puts Standard Model to shame. And he backs it, citing all of his sources. Check it out.